for understanding identity. But the idea that multiple avatars act as a plurality of the self is a really important part, because what it argued was that the functions of the technology, which allowed people to create multiple avatars and multiple senses of self, through that they were able to reflect back on themselves and reflect back on real ideas of what the self is. So, and I'll come back to that point in a couple of slides, I think. So again, she says here, and this is, apologies for the long quote, but it's, I think, quite a good one to talk about, avatars. They prove to be the material out of which relationships and interactions are embodied, much as in offline life with its corporeal bodies. Digital bodies are used in a variety of ways: to greet, to play, to signal group affiliation, to convey opinions or feelings, and to create closeness. At a very basic level, bodies root us and make us present to ourselves and to others. Avatars form one of the central points at which users intersect with the technological object and embody themselves, making the virtual environment and the variety of phenomena that it fosters real. So I think it's these sorts of works that we can return to when we're thinking about how people are engaged much more in online activity now. And before anyone thinks that avatars are a little bit old-fashioned, I would like to remind you that of Facebook's recent change to Meta, I think last year, and the billions of dollars that it is now placing into developing the so-called metaverse, which is a sort of a new wave of the development of virtual reality technology. So avatars, like we've just looked at, may come back in some form, in some mainstream way. But there's a broader point here, which is about how we articulate our identity and how we embody ourselves online, which can also be considered to be articulated through social media presence. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the direct form of an avatar, or in specifically in the ways we communicate online. Many people argue that emojis are a way of embodying ourselves in our online communication. And just as another reminder of the importance of looking back at this older work, I was reminded here of Ray Land's work. This is specifically in the area of digital education, where he talked about incorporeal fantasy. So this idea that, critiquing the idea that cyberspace was disembodied. He says even in cyberspace environments, there is always a body attached. And that quote, I should say, is from a well-known piece from the early 90s by Rosanna Stone, called Will the Real Body Please Stand Up, critiquing the idea of cyberspace as disembodied. And he continues to say cyberspace could well be a non-place, but the subjects who inhabit it always remain embodied. So again, what I'm suggesting here, that when we look back at this early work about early virtual technologies, I think we see a sophisticated way of engaging with hybridity and with entanglement of the on and the offline, which we could usefully return to. So what about methods then specifically? Well, you've probably guessed by now that this talk isn't really going to prescribe a set of methods for dealing with the post-pandemic. Rather, what I want to suggest is ways of thinking how we might do that. And what I want to emphasize here is looking back at some of the work that specifically talks about methods in relation to virtual worlds. And there's some key examples here from Christine Hine. The one in the middle is an edited book by her, and further ethnography related to virtual worlds there. And to suggest that, although not all of this work does this, the best of this work, I think, and this is Sean Bain in an interview talking about the work of Christine Hine, I think the best of that work does engage with this idea that the online and the digital is not a special or separate domain from embodied co-present spaces that we inhabit day to day. Instead, the two kinds of spaces are inextricably linked with each other. I think it's that kind of principle and that sort of orientation to thinking about methods that we could usefully employ to what may be a situation now where more people are spending more of their lives in some kind of online space. And I think we can look at Hine more to think a little bit more about the reflexivity of doing that and thinking about methods. And in this first quote here, what she's referring to is looking back at the methods that researched online communities. And so more broadly in this chapter, she suggests an earlier period of researching computer-mediated communication, which was relied on psychological theory and experiments, and that tended to portray online spaces as impoverished in terms of community and culture. And it was of course that employing ethnography in those spaces allowed us to see them as spaces of culture and spaces of authentic social communication. So she's making a key point there about how methods construct the worlds that and construct the knowledge that we discover. And there's another key point, I think, so the point with that first quote I think I'm making is that we now need to think about what kind of methods, if we are to articulate this hybrid post-pandemic world through methods, we need to think about what those methods are in terms of what kind of knowledge we want to produce. And I think the other key and interesting point that Hein makes here, which is maybe not entirely clear from that quote, is that, as she says in the second part, new technologies provide an opportunity for interrogating and understanding our methodological commitments. So the point she's making is that when she engaged and others engaged in these methods around virtual ethnography, what it encouraged them to do was reflect back on the sort of big questions, the fundamental questions about research methods and about ethnography. What are these, if this world is changed, if this virtual world is changed, and it's telling us different things about knowledge, telling us different things about presence, it's telling us different things about communication and sociality and so on, then it encourages us to reflect more on the fundamental questions about what methods are there for us to achieve. And I think she made that point very well with regards to the importance of something like virtual ethnography to thinking about all of ethnography. I think that's the same point that we might think about for this supposed post-pandemic age. It's not a specific set of methods that we might look to develop, but more an orientation towards addressing some of the fundamental questions about what methods do and about what we want to achieve with them if the world has changed and we're in this different hybrid moment. And this is my final slide, just to end with, if anybody does have any ideas or interest in developing work around methods that specifically address the post-digital, and there's a current call for papers there, and please get in touch. Thank you very much.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Adam Crabbett to